Hello, hi. Nice to see all these beautiful faces. My name is Charles Loy. I am a filmmaker. We just did a show called Climate California on PBS. You can find it on YouTube. We won an Emmy. And I'm also the host of a podcast called The Fighting Chance. But I'm so happy that I don't have to do much talking today because I would love to introduce you guys to today's panelists. If you can each briefly introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Nadia Gill. I'm a director-producer specifically of the film The Conservatives, which is a new documentary that is just coming out in festivals right now. It's on the subject of conservatives who care about climate change. So that's why I'm on the panel today.
I'm a huge fan, so I'm so excited I'm sitting next to you. And I'm also like, oh my god, I love everything that's being shared on all of these panels. This is really great. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Keone Shigeoka. I am a curiosity expert. Oh my god, love that title, right? And I'm a fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. So we research, thank you, we research the science of living a meaningful life. So we'll work with folks like Pixar on Inside Out to showcase what's the science of emotions and how does that live on screen. And I'm currently on a voyage right now, which I'll talk more about soon.
Amazing. Well, my name is Benji Backer. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Nature is Nonpartisan, because it might not be in DC, but to most of America, nature is nonpartisan, and we have to make it nonpartisan if we're going to get the results that we need. I grew up in a family of conservative vegans in Wisconsin, so we sort of went against the grain of everything that was possible. And so I've grown up at a time where, as politics has become more polarizing than ever, that our political labels are as stupid as they've ever been, and that we have to team together to stand up for nature and our environment. And so we're building a movement of Americans who believe in that, and it's just an honor to be here. Thanks.
And Benji is also the subject of the film The Conservatives.
Never sit to the left of Benji in this order. Following him is a bad idea. I'm Sacha Spector. I'm the program director for environment at the Doris Duke Foundation. I'm a conservationist conservation biologist who has been working in philanthropy for the last decade, working with people like Benji and others to foment a new movement for conservation and for climate. Our program at the foundation is really focused right now on activating the power of nature, which is already grabbing 15% of the country's emissions every year, but it could do maybe twice or almost 3 times more for the solutions that we need. So we're here to mobilize the movement for nature and climate, and we're here to show that no matter where you are in the equation, it's not about left and right, it's about where you live and what matters to you and how you can be part of the solution.
That's perfect. That's a perfect segue. So this is for all of you guys. How do you guys think storytelling can help us cut through the polarization that we're seeing in this country?
Thanks. I mean, I'm a storyteller because I believe in stories, so it's already in my, sort of core base of talking to people. Every time I speak with them, I always think in terms of telling a specific metaphor or a specific anecdote that I think meets them where they are. And I think storytelling on the screen is actually just the larger scale of that same idea. You personally have an idea that takes the form of a story, and you want to communicate something specific to an audience. And so I think at the core is sort of knowing who your audience is, figuring out what is the message that can meet that person, and then wrapping it in a sort of exciting bubble wrap that can really get that across. But I think stories are the center of how we persuade people. And every story you tell has at its root the desire to persuade someone of something. So I think just aligning this, the message, the messenger, and the audience can often go a long way to how we break through partisan lines.
Yeah, I think for me, bringing the social science into this, I think a lot about when I wrote my book Seek, which is about the power of curiosity. I highlighted like a technique called deep canvassing, and a big part of that came from the LA LGBT Center. And there's been really great research by folks like David Brockman and Josh Ocala that have found that when we door knock in a different way and we are curious and we ask folks about their real and honest views, and then we follow that up with, have you ever had a moment where you've been judged or you've been othered or you've been ostracized? Like, tell me more about that. How has that impacted you? And then you create a parallel between that and, let's say, what trans folks are feeling in our community and in our country, and why legal protections are so important so that communities don't feel that. They've actually found in the research that that's one of the, through one conversation led with curiosity, it can effectively change 1 out of every 10 people to move towards less transphobic, more pro-social mindsets and attitudes and behaviors. And that's a single conversation. And the same is true in the climate space. They've done a lot of research to show that 1/3 of apathetic voters can move towards climate action through just a 15 to 20 minute curious conversation. So to me, curiosity is such a powerful way of sharing stories on an interpersonal level. And through that, we empathize with people who are different from us, and that moves us to, shift the ways that we think and behave. And in the words of Bell Hooks, who is the OG on this, like she says, if we are able to share these stories, may we be transformed by what we hear. And I think that's the true promise of storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think piggybacking off of what Nadia said, I actually think the environmental movement has really failed at storytelling, and we have to be honest about that. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was camping with my new wife and my first wife, not new as in like, my next one. Not that that's a problem either. You do you. But I was camping with my wife, and we were kind of on like a mini moon type thing. And I looked around at the campground, and there was like the gun-toting bearded dude with the jacked up truck. And then there was like the Prius driving coexist bumper sticker. And then there was a Tesla driver who had a Trump sticker. And then you have like a family of people who have never gone on a hike in their lives, and they're just excited to be outside sitting around a campfire in the forest. And they all obviously vote differently, and they all come from definitely different backgrounds, but they're all there for the same end goal, which is to protect the environment, or at least to explore the environment, because it's the one break that we get from the bullshit that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I think that we have to understand that everyone's why for caring about the environment is inherently different. And I don't think the environmental movement has done a good job of that. I mean, we're talking about polar bears and ice caps and carbon emissions. And like, I was a Planet Earth kid. That's what I grew up watching. But at the end of the day, that doesn't even resonate when you go to school the next day, because you don't see polar bears every day, right? You only interact with the world around you on a day-to-day basis. And I think we have to understand other people's stories before trying to assert our own. And I think the environmental movement has done a bad job of that. And it's kind of transcended into now this being such a polarizing issue. I was in eastern Kentucky a few weeks ago in the poorest county in America. It was New York Times' the one county you don't want to live in America. And they remember that story, by the way. And I was the token environmental guy in this town for this commission that I'm a part of to help revive rural America. And they were like, environment? Environmentalism? 2 minutes later, you know what I love about Eastern Kentucky? I spend my entire weekend fishing and spending time outdoors, and there's nothing I love more than the environment. And there's just like, and I'm just like, what? You just told me that I was icky for being into the environmental guy. But it's because these terms and these phrases and the movement has become so loaded with things that people can't identify with, when in reality, that's what we all want. And I think we can and we will build a movement that represents that. But it actually starts by listening to their stories, why they care, and then figuring out how the environmental movement can be a part of their lives.
Yeah, completely. That is such a great distillation, right? I mean, in 1969 to 1973, all of our biggest bedrock laws protecting the environment were passed here in the United States. All of them passed the Senate unanimously. Not a single vote against it. They almost passed the House unanimously. I don't think we're a different country. I think we all still have a completely broad-based care for and dedication to the environment, and an expectation that our society is going to protect it for us and for the next generation. The story that we've been told for the last several decades, though, is that we don't agree on that. and that we actually can't see eye to eye, and that the struggle on how we get to those goals has become more important than the original agreement on the what, that we all care about clean air and clean water and beautiful places and biodiverse places. So I think in some ways, to Benji's point, that we don't have to convince people to care about this stuff. They do care about it. They just have been told a story that we can't be ambitious and strive toward those goals because we're too divided. And maybe the story that we have to tell more about is how close we actually all are to unity on this issue.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I just jump in for a second? I just want to. We had a little pre-Zoom about this, and this is something we chatted about. And I think one of the things that is the reason that people perceive us as so divided is because of where, as storytellers, we do train our lens. And here, I would say this is as wide-ranging as network news or the publishing to us as in Hollywood storytelling. And we often train our we often train our lens on the legislators or the policymakers, which are very divided and very divisive. And we spend less time training our lens on everyday Americans who actually connect in the places that Benji does. And I've watched storytellers who are effective at getting across to conservative audiences why the issue matters in their own language and values. And I think one of the ways that they do it is by framing the issue in a very tangible, local way to a single issue that person cares about. So I guess my advice would just be, maybe we don't have to look as much at our policymakers all the time who run the sort of divisive discourse, and we can spend more time thinking about how we can tell stories about everyday people.
I love that. Yeah, you can clap for that. I did want to kind of stay on this topic, though, about policy. And Benji, this is for you. I want to talk about the case study that you have of Make America Beautiful Again. Can you talk a little bit about that, what that is, how you got that going, the executive order, and then what happened afterwards and your feelings about that?
Yes. So for those who aren't familiar, which is probably most people, we worked with the president last year to sign an executive order called Make America Beautiful Again, which was a commission to basically restore forests, fund national parks, clean up waterways, fight forest fires. It was a pretty ambitious sort of broad strategy. And I'm not a Trump fan, just to get that out there. But I don't think that we can ever write off sitting at a table with those who we disagree with, even the people who we dislike the most, because you either sit at the table and try, or you don't sit at the table and you immediately lose. Zero shot of winning if you don't give it a shot. And so we got the president to sign an executive order, which is the only good thing he's really done on the environment over the first year and a half. Now, it hasn't translated into much, but what was really interesting was how we got him to do it, which was putting it in language that he would appreciate, and that would obviously be something that he could talk about, but also on issues that were inherently popular. And the reality is, even despite him signing that, the response of him not following up on it and actually going the other way is an example of how broken the movement is. Because Teddy Roosevelt warned us about this over 100 years ago. He said, our politics is a representation of the people. And if we're divided on the environment, they are too. If we think that we hate each other on the environment, then Donald Trump can get away with what he's doing, because he doesn't think that anyone on his side is ever going to speak up about it. And that's because we're not even trying to reach those people. And so I feel like we didn't fail because we tried to work with the president. I feel like we failed because I didn't have an army of people backing that up. And when I did that, I only got attacks from the environmental community for trying to sit down with him. I got conspiracy videos about how I'm like part of the Trump family, and they actually have blacklisted me now, but it's whatever. There was all these conspiracy videos about me from the environmental community, instead of like, oh my gosh, this is at least a really positive step, and if he does more, that would be really great for the country. And then, of course, the right, there's no infrastructure there. And so I think it was a perfect example of how broken our politics are, that it is so disconnected. 90% of Americans care about the environment as a priority. So if our leaders aren't representing that, then it's an us problem in terms of not standing together for the issue that we share the most. We're letting them get away with this because we're not willing to stand together, and we're afraid of working with people that we don't see eye to eye on. And it's been really inspiring since then. We launched a YouTube show called The Fire Pit, where two unlikely people sit together over a campfire to talk about the environment, and there's a comedian host. And you know, it's lighthearted, it's positive, but in the middle of it, after they've kind of started to get to know each other, they didn't know each other previously, the host says, I'm leaving for 5 minutes, and in the next 5 minutes, you have to come up with a solution for an environmental issue that our country could all rally behind. You have 5 minutes. Good luck. They always come up with something really freaking cool. And that's because they showed up there. Maybe they didn't assume that they have the same end outcome, but they've realized it throughout the show, and now there's actually space to go and do something about it. And they figured it out in 5 minutes. Our politicians who are elected and are paid by our tax dollars can figure it out for us, but they're not going to if we don't stand together. And the executive order is a perfect example of that. I don't regret trying to do it. If they said tomorrow, Benji, will you come in? We're actually thinking about doing something aggressive. I would happily go there, even though I don't like the man, because some things are bigger than that. And this absolutely is.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think, Scott, this is actually a perfect opportunity for you to jump in because your work is based on using curiosity as a way to connect people. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, but in particular, there's a part in your book I was reading last night at like 3 a.m. because I was like scrambling to prepare for this. And in your book, you say that readers may ask, what if we're being curious with somebody, but they aren't returning the favor? And I was wondering if you could respond to that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, curiosity is our desire to know and to understand. So how do we, you know, see someone that is in front of us and, you know, to many of the points that are being made here, not define them based on labels or like group identities, but actually see the individual, to ask them questions, to be genuinely interested in them. And there's two things that I talk about with curiosity here. One is, just because you're curious doesn't mean you're entitled to the information. So, you know, you might be curious about someone, whether they're pregnant or about their health, you know, condition or about their age, doesn't mean you're entitled to that information. You know, you have to build trust and a relationship, a real relationship, to have your curiosity be met. I always say curiosity is earned, it is not deserved. And I think, yes, we are in a moment of affective polarization, toxic polarization, division, but it's not just an ideological issue, this is a relational issue. And I feel it in my own families, much like many people here probably feel it when you're back home at a family reunion and you see the things that you see on social media and in the news. And I think that a big part of what we are doing is we're leaning into our judgment. And I think that's really the antithesis of curiosity. We're saying, I don't need to ask you any questions because I know everything I need to know about you because you're a Republican, you're queer, you're Asian, like whatever it is, like I know everything I need to know about you. When curiosity instead asks us to be more open-hearted and to say, I actually have limits to my knowledge, and I recognize that people are constantly changing, and I need to be continuously curious. And when we know from the research is that if you want to sustain a relationship with a stranger or with your romantic partner, with your child, or with someone who has very different views from you, one of the best tools and practices you have is curiosity. People are more willing to keep a relationship and to feel more positive about that relationship when they feel like that person is being curious towards them. It doesn't always happen, to your point, right? Like there's sometimes we're being super curious to the people around us and we just ain't getting it back. That does happen, but there's also research to show that curiosity is contagious. So I felt this when I was going on the road. I went to Trump rallies, I met mega church pastors, I went out in my little Prius with my coexist bumper sticker on. And I was like, you know, I'm doing all this research about curiosity, but am I actually modeling it? Am I practicing it? Or am I living in this ivory tower of Cal in Berkeley? So I went out, and what I found was that when I asked questions non-judgmentally about people, their beliefs, why they felt that way, many of the times, not all the time, but many of the times they asked me questions about my life and why I felt the way that I felt and the moments of rupture and a lack of belonging I felt because of my identities and my experiences. So it became this moment of connection. And so that's why I love curiosity. It's this opportunity for us to rebuild this relational fabric that's really broken right now and to connect in a deeper way. So, yeah. I don't know why I'm clapping for myself, sorry.
You can clap for yourself. That's fine.
Yeah, we're celebrating her.
Nadia, you and I, we ask questions for a living as documentary filmmakers. And I'm really curious how making The Conservatives changed you when you ask these questions, when you use your curiosity. How did it affect you? Were you a different person by the end of it? And in particular, you have a faith-based person in the show, or in the movie. And I want to know, was there a moment where you felt closer to God or to the sacred during the filmmaking?
So, I'll just go off what Scott was saying. It's curiosity that led me to want to make the film. It was 2020, and I think a lot of, it was during COVID. You did have some free time to reflect because, a lot of work was taken away from us. But there's also a lot of news going on at the same time and a lot of chaos, if we can just, be so honest about it. And during that, I was just paying attention, and I thought, the country isn't going in a direction, even though I may agree with A or B in any given situation, but the fact that there is so much intensity of emotion locked to every issue, and it's like the end of the world for, the slightest change that might be coming down the pipeline in our society. And I think I was really just absorbing that. And I was paying attention to people who were crossing the ideological spaces actually I was looking at it in every issue. And they were everywhere. And oftentimes they would have a really difficult time voicing their opinions because it turned out it was harder to go against the grain of your own tribe than it was to just coalesce with people on the other side of the aisle for certain issues. And so since I make environmental films for a living, I really just started to think, okay, how can I explore this issue in the natural filmmaking setting that I have? And that just led me to just start thinking, well, who are the people on the other side of the aisle that care about climate change? So that curiosity is what sparked my interest. And I also think that curiosity is what allowed me the access that I needed to actually make the film. Because as I started talking to the people who would become the subjects of the film, they're trying to suss out, like, oh, do we trust this woman? Like, she's on the other side of the, and I'm not lying about my own political views. Maybe we don't have to put them front and center, but I certainly wanted them to know what they were so that we could build trust and we could ask ourselves, okay, what if we are curious about each other and make this film with the idea that we're exploring this issue earnestly and sincerely and without the judgment that Scott speaks of. I think the difficult thing is that as I went out into the world to convince other people to join the journey who were not the subjects of the film and who were not the filmmakers, it was very hard to persuade those people that they should help, support this project in any way, because a lot of them were curious as well. They saw the unique selling point. They asked themselves, oh, have I ever seen a film about conservatives who care about climate change? But they didn't have the self-confidence to trust that curiosity, to see where it was going. So I think a lot of people have some curious instinct in them, but then they're kind of beat back into place by the social aspects of what we do. Oh, what if I walk out on the ledge and kind of inspect what's going on over there? And then you quickly find out somebody else chastises you whose opinion you value. So I would say those are the elements that have sort of brought us to the film. And to answer your question on spirituality, I grew up in the evangelical church myself, and I, very long time ago would classify myself as a non-believer. And so it was really interesting for me to build a relationship with another evangelical person who we agreed on this one issue of climate change. And Jessica really changed me a lot, because through getting to know her, I became less angry at the church in its entirety and all the anger that I had felt over the years from my own trauma. That's it, not just my own trauma. And building a single relationship with somebody who exhibited and manifested spirituality in a way which I felt respected the moral values that I care about, had a lot of reparations for me as a person.
Thank you for sharing that. Sacha, I wanted to bring you into this. We said that curiosity is contagious. So do you have something to say about curiosity?
Yeah, and I think what Scott described is that transformation of curiosity into trust is really you see the lack of trust in almost every environmental issue you want to pick. Right? We're trying to propel a movement that mobilizes the country for addressing climate change by taking much better care of the lands and waters, because we know it can win. But we're sort of trapped by a bunch of narratives that we've had for, again, several decades. Especially forests, which are an enormous part of the solution set, are sort of shackled to a political dynamic that was forged out of the middle of the last century. And for lots of good reasons, the environmental movement and the forest sector haven't trusted one another, for almost 70 years. But last summer, in the face of increasing evidence that forests are not just a part of the solution, but are actually collapsing, and I don't have to tell anyone out here in the West what that looks like and the kind of consequences are, but it's happening all across the country. We're in a health and resilience crisis for forests everywhere you look. And we brought together the 9th American Forest Congress, which is only the 9th that's happened since 1882. The forest community is a little bit like the Ents. They get together slowly and they think, right? But when they get together, cool things happen. And so this was the first one in about 30 years. And over the course of 4 days, we deliberated, we drafted, we created a vision for the forest future that we all could believe in. There were delegates, 500 delegates from the forest industry and the wood product sector. There were policymakers. There were environmental advocates. There were scientists. There were the forestry schools. At the end of that, I don't know if we trusted one another, but we all agreed and voted on these resolutions, and they could only pass if 85% of us, of the 500 people in the room, agreed with a statement. We agreed on a set of resolutions that spanned everything from taking much better care of our old forests, protecting much more of them, to expanding finance for wood products and things like that, from shifting the way that we take care of protected areas with a climate smart lens to dramatically increasing the forest economy, right? That is not exactly a strange bedfellow. What that means is that we were actually all there together for a long time, and we needed a process to build enough trust to be able to see one another and to see what we believe in together. And out of that has emerged sort of a new movement for forests, so that we're working hard to support. And so I think it's about stories, and it's about processes that allow us to see one another again maybe for the first time, when we've been locked in separate rooms for a really long time.
And speaking of solutions, can you talk a little bit about Moonshot for Forests?
Yeah. So I'm speaking for the trees here. We're right. We know that to get to the mid-century kind of net zero future that we need, we're relying on a lot of energy changes and things like that. But the net part of net zero is how we're actually sucking more carbon out of the air than we are now to balance out the emissions we can't reduce, right? Forests are probably our best option for that right now. The only scaled technology we have for carbon removal is photosynthesis. And so we have to deploy that at scale everywhere. What that looks like, and what we're sort of thinking of as a forest moonshot, is more than 100 million acres of reforestation around the country, right? That's a lot of trees in a lot of places, but it's doable. It's avoiding the loss of like 15 million more acres of forest over the coming decades. And we think of the United States as not having a deforestation problem. That's the story we've told ourselves. But in fact, we're losing a lot of forests every year in this country, 3% over the last 2 decades. So, and managing everything else in a really smart, climate adapted way. That's what a moonshot looks like for forests, and everybody has a role to play, not just by planting a tree in their neighborhood, but by being part of a community that says, hey, we care about the environment, we care about forests, we've been fighting for forests a long time, and we have to do things differently at a different scale than we've ever tried before, right? Like to get the overview of something that you could see from space done, it takes all of us. So that's the forest moonshot that we're trying to propel.
I love that. So the question before was, what is like the modern or the new photo of Earth, right? That we can all work on. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about what Nadia just said. I feel like I just skipped over your answer a little bit. But I think we're all trying to answer this question of like, how do we combine the sacred and the mundane? Like the policy solutions, the statistics, all that stuff that's kind of like boring and goes over people's heads. And I was talking to this climate activist, Leah Newman. She used to be a negotiator. And we talked about how when she was negotiating for the United States, she would have to like talk to every single person in the room, form relationships. And like she couldn't talk to her Russian counterpart, so she had like talked to an intermediary. And at some point, like Russia raised like these objections, and so then they had to like talk them down. And then somebody else was like, "Wait, if they can change like the agreement, then I want to change the agreement." And then there was all this like mess of figuring out a solution for this thing. And I just like heard her story, and I was thinking, there's actually nothing more sacred than individuals who are coming together to work on a common solution. And I was wondering if you guys could each speak to this a little bit of what it really means to like come together as people and making sure that every person within that solution feels seen.
Yeah, something that just came up for me was I was having a conversation with someone I went to college with who's actually a wonderful TV writer and comedian named Joey Clift, and he is enrolled Cowlitz, and he was telling me, do you know who are the two most surprising advocates for Indian country? And I was like, who? And Joey told me that it was Republican President Richard Nixon and Trump-appointed Neil Gorsuch. And I was like, wait, what? Like, tell me more. And they basically have done so much for Indian country when it comes to tribal sovereignty, land back initiatives, in part because Nixon had a native football coach growing up, and Gorsuch was in, I believe, the 11th Circuit Court and oversaw Indian law and Indian law cases. And I think it's such a great example of how our proximity and our relationships to people can actually have massive change and massive impact. I definitely, as someone who's Japanese, know from the history of our incarceration during World War II that the folks who, whether it's in policymakers or whether it was our neighbors who really protected us, were the folks who had real relationships with us, who knew us, who, these relationships that were fortified in curiosity. And so I was really inspired growing up in Hawaii that, around the hokulea, the double-hulled canoe, and the voyages that they went on, like Malama Honua, and how they told stories of people and communities who were coming together to solve around caring for our Earth. And I was really inspired to do that, except not in a double-hulled canoe, but in a big purple van that was wrapped, it's called the Curiosity Mobile. And what I've been learning and seeing is that this is happening everywhere. And we are not as connected to these stories. And Policy linked to this really incredible research where they found that most Americans want a country that's designed and built for all, where everyone belongs, where these issues are solved for, so we can have healthier, safer, societies. But what most Americans also agree on is that it's not possible to create that. They don't think we are able to come together to actually build that future that we all want. And I call that the belief gap. And in order for us to close this belief gap, I think one of the best things we can do is to share these stories of everyday people. Like when I was just last week in Mingo County and I met Steven, who was reclaiming abandoned coal fields and turning them into regenerative agriculture farms. I'm like, everyone needs to know your story. Everyone needs to know the story of the three roommates, Amy, Andrea, and Pancho in Western North Carolina, who have rebuilt hundreds of homes after Hurricane Helene with the help of volunteers. Like, these are the stories we need to be seeing on social, and that's why I'm posting them there. I mean, and it's been really impacting the way that people see the possibilities and the future of the country. So I think we need to do more of that, and everyone in this room is a part of doing that work. So.
Our time is running out. Was there a final thought from anybody?
I have been thinking about this issue, so I'll keep it short so other people can have a chance. But I'll say, I think there's a difference between the individual and then the national. And I think we split our belief system in like either you're going to go big and it's the ballot box and it's your community or it's your organizing in a big way, or it's just me and how I spend my money. I buy an electric car. I stop using plastic. But what about bringing our power in the aggregate to the local level in force? What about activating ourselves to get with our community and actually pick a project or a plan that you can accomplish? That's actually quite hard to accomplish on your own, but maybe not that hard to accomplish with 25 or 30 other people, but that can actually be transformative, can reduce carbon emissions, and can empower us in a system where we feel powerless all the time because it's not being fixed. So I would just say pay attention to aggregated local action. Activate yourself, join a group, get some people together, pick a project, and go.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that can only happen if we stop with the BS purity tests. Like, the amount of people who extend their hand out and say, I want to work with you on fighting back against this data center, or against this, or against that, or I want to fight with you on this and fight with you on that. And then it's like, well, did you vote for Trump? And it's like, yeah, I guess I did. Like, I'm not saying I did. I'm saying that's the answer. And then they're like, well, then I can't work with you because you voted for this. And it's like, get over yourself. Like, what if they made a bad mistake? What if you think they're dumb? Talk to yourself and then move on. They're extending a hand. They want to work with you. Come on. And I think, I don't care who someone voted for. I don't care if they keep making the same mistake. People make mistakes. And we need to team up with as many people who are on the same side of this as possible, no matter who they voted for, no matter where they're from. And it's both the right and the left that have these dumb purity tests about, okay, we have to agree on all these other things, otherwise we can't work together. And that's the quickest way to a losing coalition. When in reality, when it comes to these data center fights or recovering after a hurricane, you don't ask those questions. You're not worried about those things. You just go up and show up and you do the work. And that's how we need to start applying ourselves environmentally. It's how we need to start applying ourselves in terms of our families. Like, just because someone voted for somebody you don't like doesn't mean they're a horrible person. I'm sorry, it's just true. And that doesn't mean they condone everything. I was at a last thing, because I know we're over time. I was at UVA, and this guy raised his hand, University of Virginia, and the guy was like, I'm so confused, Benji, because I voted for Trump and I drive a Prius, and I don't know what to do because people judge me so much for that. And then I had the curiosity to ask, why did you vote for Trump? And he said, well, I just feel like I'm not allowed to be a guy anymore. And like, I feel like I don't like either candidate, but I just kind of chose, the one that I thought was best because I just want to be a guy. And you don't have to hate that guy. He doesn't condone everything that's going on. So don't write him off. And I think that that's what we need to do as a society, is stand together on the things we do agree on and not write each other off on purity tests.
I feel like we should wrap on that, but no. This belief gap is real. Like the idea that we can't do these things together is real, and it is an enormous barrier. Maybe those are the stories. People who have figured out how to overcome that gap, the trust gap, the belief gap. This professor, Christina Eisenberg, who's a Native American professor of forestry, gave me a great way of thinking about this, and it builds from Robin's braiding sweetgrass metaphor. And she was really thinking about how we bring together indigenous perspectives and Western science perspectives. But it's really about people with divergent starting points. It says the third piece. So the two of the pieces are obviously the two different people. The third piece, the part that actually binds us together, is our common concern, our shared worry, our shared love of whatever it is that we're working on. I think it is also, now more than ever, it also has to be a shared pragmatism, a shared belief that we can work together on, bound by that third strand in order to jump the gap, to get, because it's so much stronger when that third element binds the two strands together. So where we can find one another and find those common concerns and have a radical belief that we can collaborate, that we can work together. That's where the progress is. So those are the stories we got to be leaning into.
And on that note, a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you.